Hello and welcome. We have with us Frank Dikotter. He's a Professor of Humanities at University of Hong Kong and author of Mao's Great Famine, which won the 2011 Samuel Johnson Prize for Nonfiction. He's with us for the Jaipur Literature Festival. We'll have some questions with him. Welcome.
Thank you,
Frank.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You have studied China ever since Mao took over and are one of the most authoritative experts on the regime. What have been its greatest strengths and weaknesses?
Well, it is, in a nutshell, the strengths and weaknesses of a one-party state, of a dictatorship. I mean, the strength of a dictatorship is that you can pool all the resources of your country. For instance, you can have access to all the savings of ordinary people since the banks belong to the state. So you can start huge projects, whether it was under Mao or under Deng Xiaoping or in China today. The weaknesses, I think, are very evident. When we come from societies where we have separation of powers, we know all too well how important it is to have a free press, to have an independent judicial system, to have checks and balances, to have an opposition party to keep power holders on their toes. All of that is lacking in a one-party state. So those weaknesses are very apparent.
Okay.
Not really any different from his predecessors. Of course, they are all different people. Deng Xiaoping is quite a different person altogether from, say, Jiang Zemin, his successor. But ultimately, all of these leaders are fully committed to maintaining a monopoly over power. All of them are very determined not to separate out powers and keep power in the hands of the Communist Party of China. In that sense, he is one in a series of leaders, rather than somebody who's taking China in a different direction.
Okay. You have said in a talk that Donald Trump is probably the first US president who has rattled the Chinese and got them thinking. Can you elaborate?
Well, in a nutshell, I'm not exactly a great fan of Mr. Trump, and I'm not an expert either on American politics. But if we can agree on the fact that the People's Republic of China is a dictatorship, as its own constitution says, of course, the Constitution of 1984 refers to the country as a democratic dictatorship. And if we realize that we have a dictator with a monopoly over power, well, I would say that ultimately it takes a strong man to rattle the cage of another strong man. It takes someone who is very unpredictable to actually manage to somehow unsettle a man who is in charge of a one-party state and so very confident of his own power.
As a historian, can you share your take on how India has dealt with China? And apparently, even Nehru was distrustful of the Chinese in private after the setbacks he was handed. Should we continue to be worried? What sort of approach would you advocate to Indian leadership based on your study of the communist regime?
Well, I'm not an advocate for anyone, and I can't give advice on anything because I'm not an expert in politics. I'm just a historian, really. And of course, I'm a historian of China, not India. But ultimately, it always comes back to the same issue, namely that democracies have great strength, but find it often difficult to confront one-party states, because one-party states have at their disposal so many more resources. A good example I gave earlier on is that in the People's Republic of China, your savings belong to the state, since all the banks belong to the state. That's unimaginable in other places, including India, that the man in charge of India could somehow use the savings of his citizens, deposit it in national banks, and have his own project. So in that sense, I think the problem that India has is a problem that all democracies have when they are confronted by one-party states. In this particular case, it's all the more worrisome in the sense that China is such a very huge country. So just imagine if India finds it difficult to deal with the People's Republic of China, what about much smaller countries like Laos or Cambodia?
Your opinion on the tumult in Hong Kong, where even your students are involved in the opposition?
Well, I'm not sure my students are involved in the opposition. For starters, the demonstrators cover their faces. So I'm not sure my own personal students are involved at all. It's very difficult to say. But what is very clear is that in local elections, about a month or two ago, some 70% of the people in Hong Kong voted for more democracy and the defense of the freedoms we have. And that's ultimately what this is all about. Will Hong Kong be able to preserve what it was promised by the People's Republic of China, namely its own system, for at least 50 years? And that system has been eroded for quite some time now. So no wonder people are up in arms.
The Chinese government is in the news for its response to the coronavirus threat. But a lockdown on this scale, what does it tell you, a historian who has chronicled the worst excesses of the regime?
Well, the problem with one-party states is, of course, that there is no freedom of information. So the news is controlled by the party, and when news is controlled by the party, it becomes very difficult to find out what is actually happening. So a month ago, we were told by the People's Republic of China that there was strictly nothing to worry about in Wuhan. But now, all of a sudden, we are told that the city of Wuhan, with some 11 million people, has been put on lockdown. So what is it one should believe? Where does the information come from? It's a culture of secrecy. And that makes it very difficult to assess the situation. I think ultimately you must go back to the Soviet Union. You must study the People's Republic of China for what it is, namely a communist party. There's really no point in trying to say that somehow Chinese communists are not really communists. The problem we have when we talk about China is that all too often it is about Chinese culture when we ought to be talking about the politics of the place. So the very institutions of the one-party state go straight back to the institutions of the Soviet Union, as they are, of course, in other Marxist-Leninist one-party states. So that's the key to understanding it.
Can you tell us something about your recent book?
How to Be a Dictator is basically 8 short biographies of dictators from Mussolini and Hitler and Stalin and Mao all the way to Mengistu in Ethiopia. And through these 8 biographies, you can understand how these dictators actually take power and how they keep it.
Thanks for talking to the New Indian Express.
Thank you.